Laura, how did you find Carnivore?
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate all you do with all of your videos. Every day when I'm on either the treadmill or lifting weights, depending on what I'm doing for the day for my exercise, I always have one of your videos up. I don't get to see every single one, but I'd say I probably see 80% of them. And if I don't see them all like the very day that you put them up, I always go back down and I always look for your little yellow. And I'm like, yep, there he is, Dave Mack, Dave Mack. So just know that no, and I've been doing carnivore for over 6 years. Next February will be 7. And still, when you have people on, you're always learning. Um, so I am a registered nurse. I have been a nurse for over 22 years. My story actually started way back in like 1990. I graduated high school in 89, so that's telling my age. I am 54. At the time, um, the first time I went to see this new doctor that came to our town, I grew up in Iowa. Um, I was about 260 pounds, and he was like, "Oh, you got to give up eggs, you got to give up real butter, you got to eat chicken breast, take the skin off. Let's see, low fat salad dressing because that's healthy. Have some seed oils with some sugar, yum. And so I did. I like the good little, person. I listened to my doctor and I followed that. When I went back to see him the following year for my yearly checkup, I was 313 pounds. And so he literally is like, this is back before computers. So when people watch this, just know there used to be paper scripts. And he's like, and hands me this piece of paper. And I said, what's that? And he says, that's Lipitor. So Lipitor came out in 1987. So this was about 91 when I saw him the second time. And he wanted me to take this medication. Well, I wasn't a nurse yet, very young, 20 years old. And I said, well, how long do I take this? Because in my brain, I was just like 7 days, like an antibiotic. And he's like, forever. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not living out of a bottle for the rest of my life. I was like, no. And I had driven my 77 Camaro to my appointment and I had rebuilt a 327 out of a 68 Corvette. And I said, I run turbo blue in that, which is jet fuel. And I said, the higher octane, I get better performance. And I said, isn't the food we eat our fuel? And he said, the food you eat has nothing to do with what happens in your body. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. And he says, we'll see you in 9 months. So just prior to that appointment, I had done blood work and my triglycerides were at least 1,000. That's as high as their meter went. Yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty horrible. And if I was a betting person, which I'm not, I would say I was probably over 2,000 just because the lady, when she put it in, she's like, this takes 3 minutes to finish. And within like 3 or 4 spins, she was like, it was maxed out and it had already hit its high. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she says, well, it actually is more important. It's not so bad about high cholesterol. It's more that you're going to be diabetic. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, this ain't good. So then when I had my appointment with him, I brought that up. And before he got onto the Lipitor talk, he was like, yes, you will be full blown diabetic next year if you don't, if this doesn't get better. But this statin is going to help with your triglycerides. I'm like, okay. And so I did not fill that prescription. We had a little castle looking like library. And I went there and I'm talking, if you've ever seen these movies where they take these big leather bound books down off the top shelf and there's like 60 years of dust on it. I took down all the medical journals and all the veterinarian journals that I could find between like 1850 up to about 1910, because I already kind of knew the hijacking of the medical system in the early 1900s. So I was like, I'm not looking at the stuff that these people are being taught now. I want to know, what did we know before money got brought into it so much. And so for weeks, I took Xerox copies, which is also aging me, but Xerox copies so that I could take these home after work. I would just read and read and read. And I did that for several weeks. And even back in 1850, they talked about how good saturated fat. I mean, they had these words that I'm like, I can't believe they knew what that, but they did. Talked about carbohydrate load. They talked about the sugar and things like that, and how detrimental it was to your health. And I was just like, well, that's in everything. Like I was starting to read, labels at this point, nutrition facts, and I'm like, but that's in all of our food. So I thought, all right, I'm going to go home. And I opened up my cupboards and I feel bad. I should have just thrown it all away, but I hate to waste money. So I took everything out and took it down to the food pantry and gave it to them because I thought, well, it's better than starving to death. Now I would say, no, just go ahead and fast and wait for the good food. But I did do that. So I threw away everything white to start with. It was white breads, potatoes, pasta, rice, sugar. And then I would make all of my own like breads from like, I would mill down my own, wheat, wheat berries, different things like that. I would use honey. I had a great big garden, which I still have because my husband still likes to eat peasant food. I do not. Um, and so well, actually, Rick would say duck food, from Charger Mopar. And so I just threw that all out and I didn't even exercise because I really couldn't. I was very deconditioned at this age. I had a baby that was about 5 or 6 months old at that point, and it was the day before Thanksgiving. And I thought, I'm done. I'm not eating any of this sugar. I'm not doing any of these things at the dinner. I'm just going to eat the meat and whatever, like the green beans or something that's semi safe. And I thought if I can get through this holiday, Christmas, New Year's, I've got it made. If I can get through these, I've got it because my personality is all or none. I can't moderate. I am never a moderator in any which way. So I did that. And in 9 months, I lost 153 pounds. Uh, yeah. So I lost that weight. And then it was time to go back for my appointment. And I remember getting my blood drawn. And this time, when she drew my blood and she turned it on its side and it has a label to read your name and your birthday, make sure it's the right person. The time before, when she had done that, it had little white globules all throughout it. And I remember asking her what that was. And she says, oh, it's just fat. Well, it was triglycerides. Well, this time it just looked like blood. And I thought, oh, this is good. So she spun it and she kept spinning and kept spinning and kept spinning. And finally I said, is there something wrong? And she goes, nope, I guess this is as high as your triglycerides are going to go. And I said, oh, how bad is it? And she says, they're 33. Yeah.
From 1,000 plus to 33.
Yep. In 9 months. Yeah. And so I was like, well, that's a great thing. This doctor is going to be like, hey, hallelujah. So, of course, he was an hour and 15 minutes late for my 8 o'clock appointment, which was customary for him. And so he shows up, and of course, he looks over this. Never did he even listen to my heart, nothing. He just went by what did the lab work say, and the papers and stuff. And I remember he literally was like patting himself on the back. He goes, well, that's what I was telling you about Lipitor. And that's when I took the script and I handed it back to him. And I said, I didn't fill your prescription. And he sat back and he goes, well, you're going to die a fat ass. And I was like, I just lost 153 pounds. I don't know what you mean. I'm going to die a fat ass. I was like, you just said all my markers are good. Everything was great. Triglycerides are down. They didn't do hemoglobin A1C at that point. So I don't know what it was at the time. I'm sure it was very bad the first time. Um, but I said, really? And so I said, shame on you. I was like, you should know more about how the human body works than me. But I had to go educate myself and do all this research. And this is way before the internet. So it was hard to really dig up all this stuff. And I said, but you should know how my body works. And you don't. And I said, I'm not taking your poison. And I said, and I'm losing 200 pounds today. And he says, oh, you are? And I said, you're fired. And that was the end of that. Yeah. So that's basically what I did. And then I went to nursing school for my LPN, licensed practical nurse, when I was like 31. And then I went back at 36 and took my RN. And I was at a big university and I was on the cardiac floor because I love cardiac. My family history is father died at 42, massive heart attack, grandparents 62, all of my cousins except for one gone by the age of 40 or maybe a few weeks after their birthday, but they're all gone, all heart disease. So that always made me be like, I need to know, how's the heart work? What's this all about? So I'm up on this floor and I'm getting my people for the day, and I see this name come across, and he has a very, very, very unique name. This doctor did. And then I saw the first name and I was like, oh boy. And I looked at my instructor and I said, he may not want me as his nurse because I fired him. And she goes, well, when did you fire him? I said, 1991. She goes, it's 2006. He probably won't remember you. I said, okay. So we went in. She went in with a whiteboard and he said, I don't remember her. It's fine, blah, blah, blah. And he was intubated because he had had open heart bypass. So before I talk to him, I go out and I just look at his chart and I see his cholesterol is like 120 total. LDL is like 14, 12. It was very, very low. Everything was just crap, but his triglycerides were like 700. And so I was like, huh. I was like, this is interesting. Then I looked at his med list. What had he been taking? Metformin, simvastatin, Lipitor generic, um, fenofibrate, which is another form of a cholesterol blocking medication. And then diet, it said low fat, high protein, mostly vegetarian. Okay. So I go in and he's awake, but he's intubated. So he couldn't really argue. So I was just like, bleh. And I just started going over stuff. And I said, you don't remember me. Uh, and he's like, shakes his head no. And I said, I'm the one that you told, you tried to give me Lipitor when I was 20 and I lost 153 pounds by changing my diet, getting rid of the carbs and sugars and basically just doing whole foods. And I said, and you told me I was going to die a fat ass. And his eyes kind of got big and he kind of shook his head, And I said, but that's okay. I said, forgiven, maybe not forget, but definitely you can forgive. And I said, how did you end up having to have a 5-way bypass if you don't hardly eat any animal products, very low fat? You're still eating all the fake eggs, fake butter, fake. You're taking 2 cholesterol medicines and you're taking metformin. Why did they just do a 5-way bypass on you? And he does this, he shrugs his shoulders. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, we'll talk more about this tomorrow because I knew the next day I'd be extubating him and taking his pacemaker wires and stuff out and his catheter, which I did deflate the balloon, but it did cross my mind to maybe leave the balloon inflated and just take the catheter out. But I didn't because I'm nice. But I went and did that. And then we had the discussion, I'm like, well, this is how this works in the body. And he says, that's not. And I said, it is true. I said, how much education on nutrition did you get? Truly. I said, I'm not being spiteful, hateful, just how much? And he says, well, we had to learn enough to work with TPN, which is total parenteral nutrition, which is through the vein. So it's just this chocolatey looking stuff. Yeah. So he said we had to know how to kind of set that based on the person's, parameters. And he said a little bit on diabetes. And I said, so you've had nothing really compared to what we need to. And I said, a veterinarian has to have like a full year of how do these things work for multiple species, not just one, but all of these different species that they work on. And I said, but you told me that food that I put in my mouth did nothing for my body. And I said, I'm showing you, look at me and look at you. And you've been putting what you called your healthy foods in, and you ended up with a 5-way bypass. And I said, and furthermore, what we pulled out of your arteries, because we didn't pull it out, but sometimes when you would cut the artery to graft around it, sometimes that pressure would push the lesion out. And so it looks like a piece of chalk a lot of times. And it sounds like chalk when it hits the table. So I'm like, do you think that was fat? And he's like, yeah. And I go, does fat turn into a brick? And I said, there might be a little fat in there because as an injury happens, fat takes the immune cells and takes it there, but it'd be like a little skim, like a band-aid thickness of fat. And then if you keep injuring that area, your myocytes, the muscle sites, will turn more into osteocytes, which are bone sites, and then draws in calcium, boron, all of the things that make up the bone. And I said, so really, that's why you have the calcium deposits in these areas. And he was like, well, that's not what I was taught. And I was like, that's fine. He goes, but he says, that's fine. He goes, I'll listen to you. So, I had him for 2 days and then I didn't see any more of him. They hadn't heard from him, but my mother is friends. Her best friend is a doctor that's right next door to his office. And so probably 2 or 3 years later, she called me and she said, hey, Dr. Such and such would like your phone number, but I told him I would just give you his phone number. And I said, that's a good call because I don't necessarily want just, especially somebody that I really didn't have a whole lot of respect for. And so I waited a couple months and I called him and he was surprised to hear from me. And he said, I'm kind of a spiteful person. So you'll know that in a minute. So he says, well, I thought you forgot about me. And I said, I just thought, how many times did you forget about me at an 8 o'clock appointment that you showed up for at 9:15 and you had no other patients to blame on like getting behind? And I said, I just felt like my time was valuable. So I just thought I'd let you see what it feels like to be on the other side of that. And he said, touche. So he was like, yeah. And so he says, I've quit taking my statin and I'm trying to eat better. I just don't know what to do. And I said, you're probably somebody that keto would be okay. Very tall guy, like 6'5", 6'6", really big guy at the time. And I said, and maybe that's where you can stay. So that's what he did. Lost over 250 pounds. I mean, he did very well because he was quite large when we took care of him up at the university. And so I haven't talked to him in a long time to know kind of if he stayed with that or not. But I did ask him, I said, well, you're not taking the statin anymore. Do you still prescribe it to your patients? And he said, I have to. It's the standard of care. If I don't, he says, I can lose my job. And he says, they will actually go after my license because he's under a group. Now, if a doctor stays out on their own and isn't under like a hospital system or whatever, then that standard of care is different for them. They still have to follow some guidelines with that if they take Medicare and certain insurances, which I said, well, then go out on your own. And that, everybody's answer is, well, it costs so much. Yeah, you probably won't make $10 million, but you might make 2 million or 3 million, but do you have to be filthy rich? Can't you just do this for the good of people? But he's still under that group. So apparently that part he kind of let go. Um, so I did that up until I did it for 26 years where it was just clean food. I deer hunt, we fish. So it was those kinds of foods just out of the garden. I really didn't like most vegetables anyway. I mean, if you poured a bunch of stuff on them, but I liked asparagus and broccoli if I had junk on it. And so I had been doing that. So I was probably about 48 at the time. And I started getting menopause symptoms. I had had anxiety, depression for at least 10 years that I was medicated. I had cystic acne that I was starting to get from menopause, and that's hormonal when you get it around here. You'll see women a lot of times have that. I was having joint pain, even though I was working out. I was, very active and I started seeing these keto treats like Quest bars and kind of all of these treats that said keto. And even though all these years prior, I was reading all the nutrition labels. I just was like, oh, it says keto. I trust this because I hadn't read a nutrition label in probably 26 years because my deer doesn't come with a nutrition label, you know. Yeah, and my broccoli doesn't come with it, you know. So I hadn't had to look at anything. I hadn't been in a grocery store to buy my foods, you know. And I started eating those things, and boy, that sugar alcohol, the maltodextrin, it was horrible. I had worse breakouts. I couldn't even like close my hands. I'd get up in the morning and I couldn't open them fast and I couldn't close them. And I was running a lot at the time. I was doing several, like 15 miles 3 times a week, you know, and it would just kill me to go out there and do any of that kind of exercise. I was anemic. Very my B level was so super low. My vitamin D was super low, and I would catch everything that came along. I'd get strep throat 4 times a year. I wouldn't get ear infection, but I'd get sinus infections all the time. And so I was sitting on the couch and doing what we always do. I was scrolling through Facebook, and a Joe Rogan podcast came on with this big ox of a guy sitting on there talking about how he eats. And so I was like, I'll click on it. You know, I'm a conservative, so Joe Rogan's somebody I kind of, you know, follow some stuff. And sure enough, it's Dr. Baker. And it was that first time he had been on with him. And so I was listening to him and he was talking about ancestral eating and all this. And I thought, you know, my dad was Cherokee Indian from Upper Illinois. His family was until they walked him to Oklahoma on the reservation that he was raised on. And I thought, yeah, they weren't chasing broccoli. They followed the herds. They were not as nomadic as some of the other tribes, but they were somewhat nomadic. And I thought, huh, I don't really like broccoli unless I have ranch on it. I don't really like asparagus unless it's cooked to death. So why don't I just cut it out? And I already knew I was lactose intolerant, which is kind of something a lot of Native American blood has, that they're just lactose intolerant. So I already knew that. So cheese was out already anyway and stuff. So I was like, what, who cares? A little bit more that you give up. So I just went the very next morning. I just was like, I'm not eating anything except for meat, eggs. I did bacon at the time. I did pork, chicken, all the things. Didn't do a lot of added fat at the time because I thought, well, I'm eating fatty hamburger, fatty cuts of meat. It's enough. Um, Within just a few weeks, my anxiety was completely just gone and depression gone. And so I was able to wean myself off of the medication. Um, I noticed that my hands were warm and I had always had like ice cold hands, ice cold feet. And the doctors had always said that was anemia. And so I noticed that they were warm. And then I got up to run one morning and I can just remember bending down, putting on my running shoes, tying them. And I jumped up and I literally jumped up like a kid. Like my feet came off the ground as I went to go. And I thought, that didn't even hurt. And I thought, huh, I'm on to something here, you know. And of course, my husband, he's a very nice guy, but he was like, you eat crazy already. That's fine, whatever. He's fine with it, you know. He goes, I'm not going to eat like that. Although he does like meat and he eats a lot of that. And most of the stuff he kind of eats, I guess they'd call it maybe a paleo kind of, like he eats with the seasons. Like if we have stuff in the garden, he eats it. In the wintertime, he's not going to go buy those things because they're not in season. So he's kind of always been a little bit of a caveman type following that eating. Um, so that's what I did. And like all of these things went away. I was getting ready, I was going through menopause. I had one night of hot flashes and night sweats. That was it. That was it. Nothing else. And my mother went through 10 years of those, which I was just like, oh, this is going to be horrible. I didn't have it. I had one night and it was perfect.
That's I imagine that is like such a nice feeling to hear so many stories from different women that go through this long period of
Yeah.
just feeling awful all the time, and you're like,
Yep.
nope, I had it once, it's finished.
One time. Yeah. Yeah. I work with people on my website, and a lot of the women that I'll work with, I work with men, women. I've worked with a vegetarian and got her converted over to ketovore, but they're all like, "Oh, I'm 5 years in already," and I'm like, "We can fix this. Let's get the fat in there." So, one thing that I did notice is I did have that carnivore high, kind of that where that brain fog just cleared, but I noticed that it would come and go. And I thought, I'm not eating anything that, should really convert easily into sugar, like even broccoli turned into sugar in my body. I have a keto mojo, and I had tested that out one day because my husband could eat a baked potato the size of his head and his blood sugar would go up 52, 53 points. And I'd just watch him eat it and I'd go up 100 just looking at him. But I did broccoli one night. I took a head of broccoli, steamed it, and just put like Kerrygold butter on it. And an hour later, I took my blood sugar and I was up 250 points. And I'm like, I might as well had sugar. It was just crazy. And not everybody converts like that, but I was just one of those unlucky people that did. So I basically did away with anything that had sugar alcohols in it too. I really did do that. Now I can do salty, SALTT, which is made by the people that make keto chow. I think his name is Chris, I believe. I can do their like Coco Loco, and it does not affect me, but I've fixed my gut. So that's the other thing is I had leaky gut syndrome from all of those sugar alcohols and the maltodextrin. I did a lot of gelatin, like the old Knox gelatin. They're orange and white boxes, and I would just make plain and just cut them up and eat those to kind of help coat the stomach, along with eating, just meat. And so I did that for a while and healed that up to the point, and I knew it because I didn't have like acid reflux. I could feel like I would eat and digest my food instead of it just sitting there like a ball. Um, Kind of like gastroparesis does to people like that are taking like the higher doses of GLP-1s and stuff like that, or diabetics, they get it easy. Um, but that went away. And then I was eating a lot of like pork belly because, oh my God, pork belly is so good. And I was eating it and I would start getting like a histamine response. The next day, I would be real swollen in my sinuses and my knuckles would do the same thing. And I thought, well, then forget it. I'm not eating any pork. Well, and then it did it with chicken. And I was like, fine. And I was like, I am going to have to eat like paper before long. And finally, it just got to the point, it's a little over 3 years ago now, that I just kind of naturally gravitated to ruminant animals that have multiple stomachs. So beef, deer, lamb, elk, bison, things like that. And if I do that, I do great. And that cleared up the rest of everything. When I first went carnivore, I should probably tell people this. When I first went carnivore, I gained at least 10 pounds. I almost went a whole size up. And I can remember I'm very frugal or cheap, whichever way. And I didn't want to have to buy new nursing clothes like my scrubs, but they were starting to they weren't tight, but you need to be able to bend down and move around. And they were starting to get uncomfortable for me. And I thought, oh God, I'm not buying new stuff. I'm just not. And I just trusted the process. I don't weigh myself. I didn't look. If I go to the doctor's office once a year, then I know how much I weigh. Um, but I just trusted the process. And I can't even tell you how long it took. It wasn't very long, like maybe a month. And we went to go out, and I hang up my jeans because I have a little OCD. So I like things to be neat. And carnivore didn't cure that. And I'm glad. I think most nurses need to have a little OCD to be on top of things. But I hang my jeans up, and so I grabbed a pair of I'm trying to think. Oh, Levi's, which I don't go by Levi's because I don't align with their beliefs, but I used to have a lot of Levi's, and so I grabbed a pair and I put them on, and I we get out somewhere and he goes, "Oh, those are really nice jeans." I said, "It's the same ones I wore, last week." And he goes, "I don't think they are." He says, "These have a different design on them." And I was like, so he was looking at my butt. That's one thing. Because it was on the pockets. And I'm like, okay. So when I went to the bathroom, there's tags in the back and tags in the front on ladies' jeans, and they were a size smaller. And I was like, how'd that happen? Whoops. And so then when I got home, I thought I had been off for a week from work on vacation. So I tried on my scrubs, and sure enough, I mean, they were just exactly like I had had them to begin with. So when I work with people, I'm always like, when your body's still trying to heal, there's a lot of times you're not going to drop that weight. Your body has got to heal. And seed oils take forever, and oxalates take so long to get out of the system, and they can rear their ugly head years into this. I mean, I'm 6.5 years in, and if I do like an extended fast where I'm getting into some of those older cells, yeah, I'll end up with like a little rash on my arm or a little itchy behind my neck. And I'm like, where'd that come from? And it's an oxalate rash, is what it is. And it's like, oh, yeah, yeah, I probably broke down some more of those back in there. So I just stayed the course and trusted the process. And I thought, even if I died, 2 years later, I'm like, I don't care because I was so healthy. And so working in cardiac, you see all these people come in that had such low cholesterol, low vitamin D, all these things, kind of, you'd see these things. And I thought, well, this is crazy. We're telling these cardiac patients not to do salt, not to eat fat, saturated fat, not to do this. And I'm like, but what I know about the body is our heart is very much like a distributor cap of a motor. It's a pump, but it's also electrical. So you have to have those electrolytes. And here we've told all these millions and millions of people not to take in salt. And I'm like, well, I know the table salt's junky. I knew that because I knew the process that they use to bleach it out, and it takes everything out except the sodium chloride and maltodextrin they add in there now. And I thought, I'm not telling patients to not do salt. I'm going to tell them to do the right salt. And so when I would be discharging them, I'm like, you have to be careful, like check your blood pressure, weigh yourself every day so that your doctors don't lose their minds, but get a good salt, a mineral salt, and do that. And I mean, we had somebody who had been diagnosed with AFib, and they had it for over 2 years. And normally you can't like convert them, shock them out of that rhythm, or give them a medication by IV to convert them out of that. By that amount of time, it's usually too late. And so I thought, well, they're just going to have AFib, but maybe we can get rid of a lot of the congestive heart failure and the swelling in the legs, get them on good salts, and I'll be damned. And they didn't go carnivore, they went keto ish, but they added the mineralized salt, and they don't have AFib anymore at all.
It's crazy, I was talking to someone else about this the other day, how
Yeah.
just making sure your electrolytes are correct,
Hmm. Hmm.
is enough. And most like, basically all doctors are go straight for the
Yep.
ablation, straight for the they're not interested in, "Oh, well, maybe your magnesium's low,"
Yep.
or something.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and the sad thing is unfortunately it's because it's tied to money. I mean, if they tell you to eat better, add a salt in, they're not gonna get kickbacks. They don't get money for that. And like the childhood doctor I had was my doctor from birth until I was like 16. And then he retired, or I would have never had the Yahoo to begin with, which I'm kind of glad I did have the Yahoo at such a young age versus me not finding all this out until I was much, much older. I was fortunate enough. So I'm kind of thankful that that happened. But our doctors back then, they knew us. They knew everything about us. They remembered stuff about you, and they truly cared about you getting better. Um, the thing that I dislike about the medical system is even when I go see my doctor, and she's very intelligent, has multiple degrees, but it's all on the computer. You know, it's type in what symptom you're having. It gives the logarithm, it spits out your diagnosis. Here's the pills that you need to take. And I literally asked her because I'm not shy. And I just said, literally nothing against the janitor, but he could come in here and type in what I tell him and he's going to get the same thing out of it. Why would you waste your time going to school for 12 or 13 or 15 years when you can't even use your brain for what you've been trained to do? Like you can't even use your medical knowledge. And she was like, "Well, we have to play the game with the insurance companies." And I was like, "Well," I said, "well, maybe the insurance companies needs a fall," which maybe they will someday.
So you bring up a really good point, and this is what's always at the back of my mind when I think about the doctors following the steps like this, is like they go to school for so long, they study, and then they're basically given a checklist. Do this, if
Yeah.
this, do this, if this,
Yep.
do this, right?
Yep.
If that
Yeah.
was me, if I'd studied that long, if I'd worked my life to get to a particular position, and I went into a job and they said, "Well, here's a checklist, just do this." I would feel insulted if I couldn't don't use critical thinking. I'd be
Yeah.
insulted.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I thought with her because she is very smart. But, you know, and this is what she also says is she goes, well, it's too expensive to go and be a doctor on your own. And you need to be under a system. And I said, but there are still doctors I know that are still out on their own. And she goes, well, they won't make the money I will. And I said, maybe they don't care that they're going to make a decent living. They're going to live, a high class life, but they're not going to be millionaires. But they are going to help cure people. And instead of you guys are always going after treating the symptoms. I don't give a damn about the symptoms. What is causing me to have symptoms? I want you to get to the root cause. I'm a puzzle person. So that's how I got into messing with motors. It's like take it apart, put it back together, do this, I just like to do that. But it's the same thing when it comes to like, why am I having this symptom? I need to get to the bottom of what is causing it. But boy, when you say root cause, they just look at you like you're speaking in some language that they don't understand. Yeah, it drives me insane.
So it's very interesting as well, the kind of if they go out on their own, they're not gonna make that much money. And it's kind
Mhm.
of like, well, there is a thing called intrinsic motivation as well. Like, the money is the extrinsic part of it. Like, there's
Yeah.
intrinsic motivation, like helping people. And
Mhm.
being satisfied at the end of the day,
Right.
from a job well done, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, knowing that that patient's gone away not needing that medication anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had that discussion. My doctor, she doesn't even bring up statins anymore. I think when I was 50, okay, I'm trying to think how old I was the first time. So I was probably 47 when I had my first cardiac calcium score. And I had been keto for about 27 years at that time, because my cholesterol was high. And she was like, oh, with your family history, you got to have this. Fine. I was like, okay. So I went and did it. The first one, it was 378, 368 or 378. I do not remember, but it was over 350. And it was mostly in the LAD. So that's called the widowmaker of the heart. That's the main one that comes off. And if it goes down, everything else then is depleted because it's the main vessel that leads to like circumflex, right coronary artery, and all that. So that was a big deal. But she was like, well, that's not really that bad, really, because if, this is your age, we expect it to be there. And every year, I think she said every year it can go up 10%. And I was like, well, this is crap. So I thought, well, I'm going to take the K2D3 because a doctor had told me about that. And I was like, I'm taking that. I'm going to up what I'm taking because I was taking it for osteoporosis that I had actually completely reversed in a year and a half's time by doing the K2D3. And like I said, I don't do calcium. I don't do milk products. Um, so I doubled that. So I was up to 10,000 IU's of vitamin D3 and 200 micrograms of the K2. And so I upped that, went carnivore. So I was carnivore 2.5 years. At the time I was 50 or 51. And she was like, "Oh, your total cholesterol is 378. Triglycerides are 30." And my LDL was like 140, HDL was, I don't remember, but it was in their normal range. And she's like, "Oh, you got to have another scan." Okay. $75 is all they charge, which is another thing that I was upset about because it's a CT scan. And if you get in a car accident in front of that hospital and go have that CT scan done for you, seven to $10,000, but at cost it's $75. So that's what they were charging for these CACs. Yeah, which is dirty. I think that should be illegal. Illegal. It's immoral, for sure, and unethical. But so I get that one done, and I did it before work, like at 6:45, and so like at 7:30 or 8, I get a phone call. Now I'm working for the hospital system I had this done at. Excuse me. And I get a phone call and she was like, "I'm so sorry to bother you," but she goes, "We have your information in the computer wrong." And I said, "No, I work here. My information is correct in the computer." And she says, "No, your birthday's wrong." And I said, "No." And I said, "It's April 7th, 71." And she goes, "Oh, no, we have it right." And she goes, "Huh, that's weird." And I'm like, "What's weird? Do I have an aneurysm? Like, is there something going on? What are you not telling me?" And she goes, "I can't say anything else. We have to send it off to Springfield, Illinois. I live in Illinois, opposite side of Chicago. So I'm not a Chicagoan, if anybody's wondering. No, opposite side." But she sent it to Springfield to have radiology look at it up there. He calls me at 1:30 in the afternoon and he's like, "I'm so sorry." He goes, "The information came, it's wrong, it's incorrect, it's this, it's that." And I go, "I just need to know, am I okay? Am I dying here?" It was very frustrating. And I said, "My date of birth is this." And he goes, "Huh." He goes, "Well, that's weird." And I said, "What's weird?" And I said, "Is anybody going to send me this or upload it so I can look or anything?" I've been on the portal like 10 times, nothing. And he said, "Do you have a fax machine?" I said, "I do." So I gave him the number and he had me read it off. And let's see if I don't know if I have it with me or I do. So, because I go over this with people because they're like, "Oh, yours couldn't have been that good." And I'm like, "No, it was." So the first paragraph says, because he says, "Read your first paragraph." So the first paragraph says, "Out of 147,000 people in the age range of 45 to 65, you could be compared to 0 people." Next page goes on to say, "Individual major vessels, all of them 0. Every one of them is a 0." So I went from a 368, 378 to 2.5 years into carnivore, and it is 100%, which I know it's probably bright, zeros on all of my vessels. And then I had a CT angiogram to look for soft plaque, and I had none. And he just was like, he goes, "You're over 50." I said, "I am." And he says, "You don't even have lumps or bumps." He said, "I could go pull the average 10-year-old off the street and they would have lumps and bumps already." And he says, "You don't have any." And I said, "Where did it go?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, if you get in my file there, you can look back at, 3.5, 4 years, whatever it was back, and you'll see what it was." And he says, "Well, that's impossible." And I said, "Same machine, same person did it." And I said, "You see that it was this and now it's this." And he goes, "Huh." And I said, "That's strange considering I eat about anywhere from half a pound to a whole pound of ribeye fat and about half a pound of meat to a pound of meat every single day." And he was like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, really."
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Over time, you lost so much weight,
Mhm.
you feel better, joint pain, the anemia, all this stuff's gone.
Gone.
And then you get a result like that. Is no one, you expect all the mainstream media to be knocking on your door saying, "We've got to investigate this. What's going on?"
Nah, they don't care because there's no money to be made by saying you went carnivore, you take K2D3, anything that they can't patent, they don't want to have anything to do with, and it's the same when I reversed my osteoporosis. And I can remember they were doing my T score on the last time. And she was like, she looked at the ticker tape from the year before and she was like, this cannot be. She goes, I've never seen this reverse. And I said, even with your $5,000 infusions that you sell to people that give them, kidney stones that never reverses. Well, I've never seen it reverse. And I'm like, right. And I said, no, I said, I did K2D3, which is just two vitamins, that used to be in our food supply. And I said, isn't that amazing? If you could just tell your people who come here to look into that, you don't have to tell them to take it. Tell them, hey, maybe you should look this up and see, what it's all about. I said, "Do you know how many people we could save from just horrific?" You see these ladies that are bent over with kyphosis and some men that are starting to do that too. And I said, "That would be amazing." And she said, "They'll never do it." And I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "They're never going to do it." She says, "You have a good day and you come back if you break a bone. Otherwise, we don't need to see you." And that's been several years ago.
Wow. So, I guess, like, it's just ruminant meat for you now, or are you incorporating
Yeah.
anything else?
I did try. I tried to add in, I can do like half a piece of bacon, but if I do a whole piece of bacon the next day, I'm in trouble. I did try to incorporate cheese because I wanted to just try cheese again. And nope, can't do it. I'm not willing to try to eat chicken meat or turkey meat or pork, but I have implemented like turkey eggs and some eggs that my daughter raises. They have eggs or they have chickens, turkeys, different things like that, and they do it the old fashioned way. So they don't, do feed from a store that's been sprayed with stuff. They have an organic farmer that they get corn and they crack it. They make cracked corn themselves for winter time. In the summertime, it's all out, in the yard. It's scraps. It's what they, leftovers, stuff like that. Um, and then chickens are kind of carnivore themselves. Like if another chicken dies, they will completely devour that chicken, which I didn't know that till I saw it kind of happen. And I was like, that's disgusting.
Yeah,
Which is
I
really
didn't know that
cannibalistic.
either. Yeah,
Hmm.
not even carnivore, cannibal.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I can't do some of those eggs. Now, even with that, I have to be careful. I usually will do like one egg white to maybe two egg yolks, but it's just once in a while. Like if I just listen to my body. Like if it's like I'm craving eggs, then I'm going to go eat the eggs. But I really don't have cravings. And my body, I just listen to my body. I did a lot of fasting. I've done a lot of long fasting. I did 7 days in 2019, right when I first started carnivore. I had a 7.5 hour surgery that was, well, they said 5.5, but it ended up being 7.5. And they said, prior to it, to eat lower carb foods. And I was like, no problem. I'm not eating any carbs. But I decided to fast. So I fasted 7 days, just drank salt, water, and plain water through the days. Did that for 7 days. I made bone broth and took that with me to the hospital, had surgery, refused to stay in the hospital because their food and what they were going to feed me and make me eat, I was not willing to do. So they had like a hotel type thing right next door. And I said, I'm a nurse. I'll stay next door. Something goes haywire. I'll call you. So I did that. I drank the bone broth that night. Next day, started right back into another 7 day fast. And when I went back to have some of the drains removed, stuff like that, she was like, as many stitches as I had. She was like, you're going to scar because I normally used to scar in keloid, where real thick of a scar. And she was like, I can't even tell in a couple of these places already that the stitches had, come out. Some of them were self-dissolving. She goes, I can't even tell I did surgery there. like there was no scarring at all. Like the skin was just as normal as everything else. And she goes, "This fasting thing is pretty interesting." She goes, "I got to have all my patients fast." And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't want to make a standard American diet person fast for 7 days. It will not be pretty. They're going to be sick and in the bathroom and they'll lose weight."
Yeah, and their cravings during that time are gonna be off the charts. You're gonna have to tie them down.
Yeah. 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 So I did that. Um, and I healed very fast. I think I used, 2 pain pills. Um, I don't think I had to use anything after that. I took Tylenol for a third day. And then I was like, I'm not taking any of this. I didn't have inflammation from any of it. So I was like, forget it. So, yeah. And now, I do home health nursing, and then I also have my website that I do on the side where I do work with clients on there. And then I also make tallow products, because when you cook as much fat as I do, you have a whole lot of tallow left over. And so I had hundreds of quarts of tallow. And so I had been making my own lotions, and I had done that for a long time, my own tooth powder, which is not made with tallow, but I'd made a lot of these natural things like elderberry tincture, because I do think plants have a place, but I think that they were put here for medicinal reasons. Dandelion root tincture, different things like that. Oregano oil for antibiotics, stuff like that. So I had been doing that and giving them to family, really just trying them out on family. Let's just be honest. I was like, "You're my guinea pigs. How does this work out?" And myself. But then I decided to, do a website and start doing that on the side. And then I do home health nursing. So I'm a nurse that goes into the home, you know, uh, and my scope of practice for nursing says nutrition education. Doesn't say I have to follow the American Heart Association, Diabetes Association, which are all corrupt. It just says nutrition education. So I immediately go in. Of course, I have their paperwork ahead of time. So I know their diseases. I know all the things, all the meds, all the stuff and I just go in and I kind of feel them out. Are they open to, they want to get better? Are they sick of being sick? Because there are some people that they really do love to be sick. And it wouldn't matter, what you could, yeah, it just wouldn't matter. And so those people, they still hear a little bit of my spiel, but like today, I had a gentleman, and I just started in, with the education of, you wiping out this, get rid of this, you got inflammation, we could do this. He's a type 1, been a type 1 diabetic his whole life, and he's like 74, but he does very well. No neuropathy, anything. So he's done very, very well for himself, which I was like, kudos to you, because most people at 74 type 1 would be losing body parts if they were eating the standard American diet. So he does eat fairly clean, but I was like, there's a Dr. Hampton in Chicago and his wife's a type 1. You should watch his videos and see how they decrease the amount of insulin she has to take in. I think she takes 5 units now, if I remember the last time I seen a video he did. And this guy's taken 80. And he was like, that would be amazing. So we get everything done and I'm getting ready to leave. Of course, he's got a pick line for IV antibiotics for an infection in the knee. And I'm getting ready to leave. And he said, I can't wait to talk to my son and daughter in law. They're functional doctors and they're also carnivore. And I was like, I've got to interview them. I was like, you gotta hook me up when I'm not, I can't do it while I'm in here working with you as a nurse. Like, that's unethical. I'm not going to do that. But when this is all said and done and you've graduated, here's my card. Definitely give it to them, and I will. That would be amazing. So, yeah, I was pretty excited.
That's awesome. Um, so if you're like, so just so I understand it, sometimes you are working with people from a more carnivore or a ketogenic perspective on your website? Like, people might
Mm,
come to you
well,
for some kind of coaching or
yeah, I've had people that were like vegetarian too, or keto, that have been like, or I'm not going to name names, but have been following this uh, specific fast where you do like protein and less fat and stuff like that. And I've had a lot of them come to me. I had 25 just last month that followed this person's protocol. And they're like, I gained 12 pounds and I've got all this inflammation back and I've got that. And I was like, there might be a few people that can do that style of the lower fat, higher protein, modified fast, whatever it's called. And I'm like, I haven't seen very many people that can do that. And I'm not saying there aren't some because I think we're all somewhat unique. But I'm like, especially with females, I'm like, I find the opposite to be true. I find that we have to go a whole lot higher fat. Like I easily do 80 to 90% fat to 10 to 20% protein is what I take in for myself. And a lot of the people I work with online, it's about that. But I work with them on multiple things. I'll have people who will be like, my doctor did my blood work. Here's my labs, this is what he said. Can you explain what do my labs tell you? And then I go over like their stuff. But I work with them mostly on that. I do a lot of videos. I do a video every Monday, but I also do videos on how to make your own products. So, like, if you have tallow, like you can make your own lotion. You don't have to buy it from me. I'm not making anything. I made $185 last year when I went and did my taxes, and my tax lady's like, you have a business and you only made $185. I said, I don't care. I'm a nurse. I was like, this is just to help get good products out there to people, especially that are on a fixed income. I purposely kept it very low. And I knew that I was probably going to just about only break even. And I'm like, that's okay. I don't care. I want people to have better products, be able to be healthier. So that's a lot of what I do too. And then I like to hunt. I love to be outside. So I do a lot of walking outside, a lot, and I still work in the garden. I just don't eat any of that crap that's in there, but I do pull weeds.
Um, so when you're hunting, what are you typically hunting? Like deer or?
Yes, so mostly deer. I mean, we have a turkey season here as well. I think they're going to give us a fox season this year. I will not be shooting fox. I don't shoot something I don't eat. So I'm not going to be doing that. I have shot a couple coyotes, but that's only because they're aggressive and come after you sometimes. And yeah, if it's going to chase me, then yes, I'm going to shoot. I bow hunt, shotgun, muzzle loader hunt. I do all of them. Um, but yeah, it's primarily deer, and I fast during deer season. I don't eat during the three. Our first season is the weekend before Thanksgiving, so it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I fast that entire weekend because it makes your senses sharper. And that's something that I had noticed. And plus, you're out in the cold, and I want to boost my immune system so I don't come down with anything because I am asthmatic. And so being out in the cold doesn't per se cause you to catch a cold, but if you're an asthmatic, that hot cold can definitely affect the way your lungs are, and the way you breathe. So I just fast. And that's what I do during both deer seasons. Sometimes we get a third season. And then I process my own meat. I don't take it to a locker and have somebody else do it. I hang it for, anywhere between 7 to 11 days, which is how all meat used to be handled, was hung that long. And then I take it off the bone. Sometimes I grind it up for hamburger, some of it, and I add ribeye fat. I've always done that and grind it up and make hamburger. But I also cold pack probably 75% of my deer meat, fish, beef, lamb. And that's just where you pressure cook it into jars, just like you would like green beans. And so I do that because I'm also a little bit of a prepper because I do not trust the government to come in and save me when the crap hits the fan. So I'm prepared.
Right. Nice. So how what's the best way people can reach out to you?
Really, they can, respond, come in and comment, like on Healthy Carnivore at Healthy Carnivore, is one. if they go to my Healthy Carnivore on YouTube, in the description, I give like my Facebook, my Instagram, all of that is listed on there. I will tell you, of course, now it's kind of calmed down a little bit in the United States, but several months back, I was off of Facebook as much as I was on Facebook because I was in Facebook jail for my belief on meat and my political beliefs. So, and you can't say the word God. So I was kicked off a lot. So I used to tell people, you can find me there. I might be in jail, I may not, but really they could do that. And then they can always go to russellbrands.com and click on there, and they can always look at the products, or if they want to book time with me to work with them one on one, we can do that. I also have Marco Polo groups that are connected to my YouTube channel. So it's a messaging app that you can do with whoever's in the group, and you get to put in whoever you want. And so on my YouTube channel, it's called Carnivore Feline 24/7, I think is what it is. But you can hit like join channel, and there's like different levels. And the third level, there's a charge every month for that, but that's 24/7 that we are in connection with each other. And I have several groups. And I don't know if you know who Carnivorous Grandma is. Her name's Robin Heron. Yes, we actually started a group together, and so we have multiple that we work with. I have some that I just do one-on-one. So it just depends on what the person really wants, but it's kind of nice to help keep somebody on track. Like every day I can be like, and it's not like, hey, look at me, I'm better than you, but it's like, hey, what did you do today for your movement? Did you walk? Did you just lived, soup cans? What did you do? And then what did I do? What are you eating today? What do you feel? Go outside and ground, do these things. But they can ask you questions like, hey, this is a symptom I got. What do you think? What is it? Do I need to see a doctor? Is this something I can wait? And so it's just kind of nice to do that. And that's something that, like I said, I mean, I don't get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and check it, but if I hear a ding, I usually am like, I'm right on it, and they get a message back immediately. It's not too often that it's like down the road. So that's basically the easiest ways to get a hold of me.
No worries. I'll link to all those in the show notes. Laura, thank you so
Perfect.
much for coming back on, letting us know how you're going, and
Yeah.
sharing all this wonderful information. I really appreciate your time.
You are very welcome. Thank you again for what you do.